patient started having chest issues. Well, this person, through their training or what have you, started rendering care and providing CPR. Well, the patient died. Well, as soon as that plane landed, that specialist was arrested.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Including a medical doctor in your EP team. Today, Sean West and myself, we're going to be speaking with Dr. George DeBusk, founder of Aspitha, a bespoke medical doctor service to ultra-high net worth individuals and EP organizations. Happy New Year, Sean. How are you doing?
Yeah, it's been great. Happy New Year to yourself and to all of our listeners. It's been great just to have some downtime with the family. I was fortunate to have a bit of time off this year, which is always difficult in this industry, but it was nice to have the downtime, and I hope everyone else has had a bit of downtime with their families. And if you have been working, I hope you've managed to remain safe and keep your principals safe also.
Wonderful. Yeah. And carving that out is part of your health regime too. So it sort of is linking with today's topic of medical doctors. Actually, this particular individual that we're speaking to today, I met at the IPSP in Vegas, which was a fantastic event. You will have noticed, as listeners, hopefully, no doubts, that we had a guest co-moderator for the last episode in Chris Story, where we talked about the Unified Protector. And when Dr. DeBusk sort of mentioned that he might like to do a segment on MD, I initially thought back to the beginning of the pandemic when we sort of said, because certain services are no longer available in quote unquote safe countries, does that mean everyone needs an MD? And then I think there was a general sense of, maybe that's an overreaction. Surely it's more likely that your maybe aging ultra high net worth individual will have a boring complaint rather than a gunshot wound. Do you see what I mean?
No, I get where you're going with this, and I think heart disease and heart problems is probably more of a risk than, feeling a bullet wound or something like that. So there's definitely a case for having a doctor, not necessarily within the team, but access to for the team. And I think, I've worked for a number of organisations and high net worth individuals, and what I find when you get to sort of, a billionaire status, for instance, a lot of the billionaire individuals do have their own. Everyone has a private doctor, but one that's more, accessible, on call, than booking a GP appointment at a GP surgery. They have these guys that are employed by them that know everything about their health. They can advise on drugs they should be taking or vitamin, or whatever that may be health-wise, to keep them in tip-top condition. I think working hand in hand with the team, I know a lot of good organisations where they'd have the doctor that's employed by the organisation. They can lay out set protocols that will be passed down to the CP team to say, your principal has these. If your principal doesn't want to share them with you direct, if there's anything you need to be aware of, you can become aware via that, obviously maintaining the confidentiality of the principal, of the things that's required to be kept confidential. But things that you may need to be aware of, if you spot a certain sign or symptom, this is the actions on that you take. Call this number, speak to me, speak to this person, whatever it may be, so the team is more prepared and ready and have the correct access to the correct equipment or drugs that they might need.
And I guess that's the nugget. That's the crux of the matter, isn't it? Because there may be complaints that are embarrassing. There may be complaints that are private, and people would open up to a medical doctor in a way that they wouldn't maybe to someone who is an EP specialist but on the side did a FRET course, right? They're going to feel more connected with the MD. So I guess it'll be interesting talking to Dr. George how that can be integrated in the team. Are EP operatives your eyes and ears, or are they going to overstep the boundary in any way if they try and do anything medical? Also licensing, also the difference between different countries, and then I guess how, if you were to have an MD in your team, How do you keep them engaged? They the Dr. DeBusk is a trauma surgeon, so that's probably quite high paced, I would imagine. How do you keep them part of the team?
I just see. I'm not sold on the idea of having a doctor within the team, potentially, certainly for access to. And I think, like we said, they can be employed within the organisation. But I think doctors also need to keep themselves current with other people as well. If you have the skill field, you have to keep training or keep treating, advising, whatever it is. And if you're only working to one person and you're not getting any other hands-on experience, you can become complacent and out of touch with upcoming trends, new technologies, new treatments. So I don't think they need to be on a team. It's the same with other positions as well. You can bring people in, they come to a set period with you, then they go in, they do another form of training, get some more skills, come back. To be actually embedded on a CP team, I'm not too sure. Great if you can have it, but I'm not too sure how many teams have that. In hostile environments, you have your teams that have a paramedics, for instance, but an actual doctor, I don't know.
Well, this is indeed what we're going to explore. And hey, this is a new year, new you, I don't know, health kick type episode to start off the new year. It could give our audience reflections on how they look at their own health. It could make them think about the health of their team, their principal, and generally a nice start to 2023. So, Sean, let's get into it with Dr. George DeBusk. And let's look at the possible, outcome of including a medical doctor in your next EP operation.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit magazine.
Including a medical doctor on EP operations, a big idea, perhaps one that has come to the fore over the last few years. Today, we are delighted to be joined by Dr. George DeBusk, founder of Aspitha. It's a pleasure to have you on. How are you doing?
Thank you, sir. I'm doing fine. And yourself?
Yes, I'm enjoying the new year. It's exciting, lots going on. And of course, it was just a few weeks ago at the IPSP in Vegas that we met. But before we get into sort of why we're talking about this with you, why don't we start off with the topic itself? Why is this a topic for EP? What problem are we trying to solve by sort of grappling with the idea of including an MD?
Sure. The biggest problem that I've noticed and has become quite pertinent is the lack of medical oversight. What we're noticing, especially in law enforcement and other groups, that there is the need to provide some sort of standard, especially a medical standard that we see, let's say, in the UK with the SIA and providing, let's say, FREC training or something of the sort, but that the community, the protective security community, comes to expect and would adhere to, that would, again, satisfy everybody's perspectives.
Okay, so oversight and perhaps someone to tie it all together, and we'll get into exactly how that could work in practice and all the benefits. But all right, let's take a step back. Let's ask that question that many people sort of start with, but I like to start with the topic. What about you? Where does your passion for this combination come from?
Sure. My background specifically as a trauma surgeon, being in academics and for many, many years, with a family background in law enforcement and military. I'm the only one in my family who was not in the military because I was told, well, you should go to school first. Well, through years and years, it's going on a couple decades of schooling and then practice as a trauma surgeon, working with special operations groups, initially with law enforcement, and they're on transitioning to working with special operations medical, specifically the Special Operations Medical Association, and being an associate editor of the Journal of Special Operations Medicine, I've come to learn and know a number of different security groups and protection groups, both in the military and both private security as well. And that's become a real enjoyment and pleasure knowing folks in this community.
So why should this be of interest to the uninitiated protector? What should the uninitiated protector better understand? They may not have even a FREC type qualification. So this is presumably going to be something that they need to learn about.
Yeah, the biggest concern that we've noticed is with folks and security folks, protecting folks that are starting to come under some level of scrutiny. And there's an expectation that I've noticed, and it's been ever present and certainly increasing recently in the past few years, that people would have some sort of medical training, whether that be basic life support, first aid. People are pushing around the expectation that people have these kinds of qualifications up to and including being able to handle any sort of emergency situation. And I'm not sure people have a good sense of what it entails, especially from the fundamental level of, okay, am I really going to be tasked with being the immediate first responder if there's a situation? Because by de facto, they are the initial people on the scene, up to and including having to deal with emergency responders. So some background of clinical medical understanding is definitely important.
And just for the context of the listener, you're an actual MD. You're an actual practicing MD. This is not like some sort of retirement gig for you. This is actual MD work.
That's correct. I'm a trauma surgeon and an intensive care or critical care specialist as well, currently in practice.
Perfect. Okay. So then let's get into how this can either enrich the life of an EP, operator, or if they're building a team, when and where they can sort of integrate an MD. Because we've had on the podcast before the debate between tactical medic and paramedic. In fact, we are going to have an upcoming episode about sort of medevac medics, which is in itself something even more different. This is one step above that even. How can we get this sort of topic to the front of people's minds if we're still having a, shall we say, debate about tactical medic versus paramedic?
I think it's really important to understand that the protective security community has to accommodate the full range, the full spectrum of specialists, including the security guard at the door, up to and including quite advanced practitioners like the tactical medic or the paramedic. So at a fundamental level, meeting those expectations of our community is really fundamental. Without some sort of basic understanding and expectation, and a community that agrees to adhere to those standards, I think you're going to continue to have a problem with providing those guidelines to, again, the very, very entry level security or protection specialists, up to and including very advanced practitioners that may have, let's say, medical training through the military or what have you, even surgical training. So I think you have to first identify who we're talking about before we start adding in all the players.
Okay. And I mean, I suppose you're working in this field, but
yes.
Is there much demand that cannot be filled? I mean, is this even a widespread concern that sort of people should look at?
Yes. And the reason for that is because of the legal liability that is now starting to become ever present. Even in the military, we're seeing that it's difficult to be anywhere on this planet that is in some way not connected digitally or by some communications, even special operations teams. And we saw that last year at the conference. We were plugged in directly live with Ukraine into what was going on with some of their teams. It's impossible nowadays to not have some degree of medical oversight for any number of reasons. One, just to have that additional security for the medical practitioner, again, regardless of what level they're at. But to have somebody say, no, I think, I can weigh in on the situation. They have some additional background. There are numerous companies that provide that already to airlines, for instance. That's a very common example, such that, again, if a situation comes up, that there's some additional level of security and medical advice and input that's being offered the practitioner so that they're not, quote unquote, practicing in a vacuum or practicing at all for that matter.
But, and I would, I'm just sort of throwing it out there, if an MD as a general doctor, a generalist, is going to assess whether or not a patient needs specialist care, is that something that could be maybe done with telemedicine rather than send an MD with a team? Because I mean, do all MDs have paramedic skills? What's the difference across countries between a GP and a general MD? I guess what are we talking about specifically? Are we talking about just having it in your ecosystem for compliance, or are we talking about taking an MD into a hot zone, into your next London operation? What are we sort of reflecting on?
Right. I think what you are asking actually has a number of different facets to it. The first and foremost aspect is, can a GP or a physician be able to provide some degree of medical direction through telemedicine? And absolutely. Of course, when they do that, there's a couple of caveats. The caveat number one, first and foremost, is that this person not be an entry-level physician, somebody who, let's say, just finished training. They need to have some degree of experience. I say that they should have at least a minimum of 3 years in their specialty, that they have already, so to speak, acquired at least a minimum degree of skills to be able to handle just their own ability to render care and have an understanding by phone or by video chat what they're assessing. Sometimes that will happen through their training. Invariably, physicians will, through their training, have to deal with consultations. So in a way, that's pertinent right off the bat. However, when it comes to security and protection, what's really incumbent upon any physician that deals with this community is that, number one, they have to be cognizant of the requirements of a protection and security team. Somebody who doesn't have that understanding to ensure that any medical issue becomes a significant liability, not only to the detail or the team providing for the principal or the client's safety, but also that any untoward embarrassment to the client and the principal could have a significant effect on their safety, number one, their families, their company, their brand valuation. So anybody that's in this community should be cognizant of the requirements of the security agency. Beyond that, when we start talking about other facets of can anybody get involved, well, I would strongly suggest that in order to do that, again, they might want to ratchet up into those levels of experience and professionalism that comes more so with actually having been involved and invested in the community. And that right now is lacking. for a number of different reasons, which we can discuss. But my feeling is that the medical oversight and those physicians who have been involved in the past, I heard at the CPC a myriad of different stories from different agency owners, which unfortunately embarrassed me as a physician because I can understand that the level of competence, their experience, was sorely lacking. Not everybody is a trauma surgeon, of course. Not everybody is an intensive care physician, which I'm completely cognizant of. When people hire me, they're not hiring me as a trauma surgeon to, quote unquote, surgerize or operate. What they're hiring is somebody who has insight, who can actually interface with the client's GP, up to and including their subspecialist. We see, and it's been my experience, that I deal with a lot of, let's say, orthopedic surgeons. Try and be a GP or a family practice physician in the United States, trying to get a hold of a neurosurgeon or an orthopedic surgeon and not being one yourself, and try to have a succinct and cogent conversation with somebody. I find that, again, you're trying to establish the full spectrum of care for a patient, not just be reactionary and deal with, well, whatever just seems to happen. You're actually trying to provide for any eventuality, but also have the experience and wherewithal to know that there's a lot of things that come with a security detail, the entourage, their family. I've heard of stories of the client having a teenage daughter in the family who didn't tell their family that she was pregnant, and being on in a private aircraft 20, 30,000 feet up in the air, and then having an issue. So again, there's a lot of things that come along with that need to be taken into account. So,
and I guess that paints perhaps a different picture from some of our I mentioned paramedic versus tactical medic debate, because it's not about, oh dear, there is a bullet wound to patch. It's not, oh dear, there is a tourniquet to apply. Although maybe that could happen, that could happen. It's much more likely, maybe, I put to you, my principal is in advanced years, or my principal has a specific requirement anyway. It's much better that someone comes with them, because that could flare up. That could be an issue. We're not really worried so much about why we need an MD for, well, trauma, or are we? Are we worried about bringing an MD with us because previously safe countries, quote unquote, or previously reliable countries where we imagined we could find healthcare, over the last few years, there have been examples of where maybe that was not available?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. What I do currently is through my company, I work as a contract physician at various institutions, hospitals in the United States. And that's something that has become ever prevalent. And that is, people are quite cognizant of the traveling nurse. Well, there are traveling physicians, there are traveling surgeons. And being one, I can tell you that even in a first world country with resources that people assume are perceivably indefinite, I can guarantee you, and I can tell you that I have been to places in the United States that are not that far out of major in cities that are severely lacking in resources, especially, let's say, along the border in some of our border towns and cities, that it's really shocking. So when somebody says, well, we can have our resources, we have that, I would beg to differ. And I think it's really important that anybody, again, who's going to be providing the community, the protective security community, they have to have an understanding of, let's say, medical intelligence, the medical threat analysis. We call that the advance. But to your point specifically, that also entails, let's say, the geriatric patient that you're speaking of. Does an MD have to be physically there with them? No, not necessarily. Have I heard of stories where a principal, a client, would like to have that physician, as part of the detail. Absolutely. And I think they should be accommodated more often than not as a client service or a service to the client. But again, I think it's really incumbent upon anybody to understand that the majority of what you're going to see, and this is actually present in the literature, especially when you're talking about, let's say, condoms. People throw around TCCC or TECC, and that's wonderful. Those are standards, principally TCCC or Tactical Combat Casualty Care. That's military. That's geared for military type operations and professionals. But when it comes to civilian, we're actually talking about TECC, or more specifically that I see for law enforcement, that's condoms. Your listeners may not be familiar with it, but that's the counter narcotics program that is, again, specific to more of the civilian, let's say, law enforcement. And that's where people have to understand what we're discussing here. The majority of what people are going to see out there are actually going to be this quote unquote, non-trauma situations, the primary medical conditions that people have that start to bear. One of the good examples that I like to give is the patient with Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disorder. These people, unfortunately, have very, very, it can be a serious condition. But let's say they may be defecating, blood. It's like, okay, well, that could be a bit of a problem, and that could be extremely unnerving to a detail that if they didn't know to expect it or didn't know what they were in for, that might cause a lot of problems for the security team. And really, what it entails is just a little, preventative maintenance, some, foreknowledge. That oftentimes I find the principal too embarrassed to provide, or the security team to specifically ask for. And as a physician myself, again, I'm able to bridge that divide and say, listen, I'm here as an asset. I'm here to provide additional safety for you, let's say. Can you give me a little bit more information? I'm not as worried about the stabbing or the shooting, and let's be honest, any situation with a principal that has gotten to that point, things have really gone sideways, and that really brings up questions as to what type of preparation the security team has provided, if indeed the principal or the client, the entourage, or whoever is now under threat of getting shot or stabbed or blown up or what have you. So I think it's important to understand the expectations, as I mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it paints an important picture, because maybe there are some, principals in advanced years, or maybe with, entire family entourages that go into a hot zone, but I don't hear about it. And maybe there are some that will come under fire, but it is maybe the more mundane, the more embarrassing, the more long-standing issues that you have to deal with.
Correct. And that's a lot of what I deal with. One of the things that I ensure I have the ability to do is, as you mentioned before, provide a digital presence, whether that be telemedicine or what have you. But it even comes down to the electronic medical record system that I employ through our company, digital prescriptions, being able to, if necessary, provide direct medical care, because that's one of the things a lot of physicians also don't do. I've noticed that many of them are quote unquote absentee landlords, as I like to call it, because when I'm in the trauma bay or something of the sort, and I have teams coming into me, I'll ask them, well, you provided this care, you rendered this type of treatment. Why? What was the thinking? Have you trained on it? Have you discussed this with your medical oversight or your medical director? And more often than not, I find the response is no. So, for myself, I have licensure to practice in states across the U.S. and also abroad. So if a situation comes up, it's incumbent upon me to be culturally aware and sensitive, to understand that I may not be in a Christian country, so that those norms that are applied in a Western mindset, they don't exist elsewhere. And that's really, really critical, again, for oversight to provide that they have no limitations, also of a religious nature, or other gender, let's say, orientation situations that would, compromise their ability to provide first and foremost that asset to the team, the security team, but also in general the ethical needs of a physician caring for a patient. Because ultimately that's what ends up happening. You're not just there to sign documents saying, oh, you've got certification to provide CPR, but there's a little bit more there to provide that additional insight. Again, from A to Z, we're looking at, okay, teams that can't even give paracetamol. For the US audience, that's Tylenol. So, you'll have folks who drivers and transportation companies. I had a wonderful conversation there at the CPC in Las Vegas, of the needs and requirements of the transportation team. There are clients, principals, that when they're in the auto, they're asking for simple things like, again, paracetamol, aspirin, or what have you, and they cannot give it. As simple a thing as it is, they just cannot give it. So people need to be mindful. Physicians, I find that to be of critical importance, that they're not cognizant of really what a team can and cannot do. And that, again, gets back to that liability and those legal ramifications, not just in the United States or the UK, but in, again, countries that have a different set of religious norms. That becomes really, really critical.
And so, I mean, that is important, because you need to get the right license. I'm sure protectors will appreciate that, because there's lots of places they can and cannot work. But maybe by way of utility, could we say what makes a bad integration with an MD? What do you want to avoid? I mean, could it be as simple as they didn't cost it properly? What makes a bad integration?
Right. I can give a number of examples. I think fundamentally, though, number one, the ability of a security agency or company to understand the various degrees of competence, experience, the services that are able to be afforded. In other words, what type of clinician am I looking for? Because here's the thing. A number of companies out there will provide medical support. Wonderful. That's great. I can name a couple of companies that are extremely well represented, both in the tactical community, the military community, et cetera. And almost to a degree of significant concern and significant trepidation on my part, the clinician, and the reason why I say clinician, because a clinician is anybody that will render medical care who has some degree of advanced training. A physician is different. I think we can agree on that, but these companies that provide that level of oversight are actually providing a clinician. And it's happening especially in private practice groups, GP offices, family medicine offices in the United States. It just happened the other night. One of my clients called me and said, well, I called my GP's office and I wasn't able to get to them. I got the nurse who's covering overnight, and they just said, well, just go to the emergency room. Well, that's a bit of an issue because, number one, they're not getting somebody who can actually directly care for them. They don't have an agreement in place. Number one, this nurse may have it, but she does then not have the additional experience, which as you know, her thought was, well, maybe the child, and this is a pediatric issue, which again, that's also a significant concern to people dealing with, let's say, a principal or client's children as part of the entourage or family, especially if it's static security and protection. But dealing with somebody who doesn't have the experience and would just simply say, well, do this or do that, to the detriment or imposition of the client. The fact that they sent this, my client with his, at this point, they were a 4-year-old child, into the emergency room to wait there for 3 hours before even being seen by anybody, until they finally called me and I said, just go ahead, leave. I asked a few simple questions and was able to instruct them from there. So when you contact these other companies, the question becomes, well, what level of experience are you getting? Are you getting somebody like myself that, again, I function at a standard medical director level, which is really like a GP, but the additional skill set to understand, okay, this person, this 4-year-old child does not have twisted bowel. Their life is not under threat. They're not even at the point where they're so severely dehydrated or septic. Somebody that can have a better understanding and insight by, again, just asking a few questions to be able to prevent, let's say, an embarrassment and an untoward event to the client, and also putting a significant wrench in the works of the security team.
Because that's, just as they want to be an enabler and facilitator to their principal, so you need to be that for the whole team.
Right.
But then I can imagine there's solo operators out there, or operators that sometimes join one team, sometimes join another, and they might think, well, you know what, I can barely get my head around TCCC or FREC and things like that.
Right.
Where can I add value without being annoying to said MD? Should I? I mean, they should be your eyes and ears, but where can those eyes and ears about your principal really add value?
Yeah, getting back to the concept of the absentee landlord, again, it's become a bit of a legal concern now in the States. And that is, number one, it's incumbent upon the medical director to directly engage and be able to certify and sign off that they understand the capacities, the competencies of the people under their direction. Because should something go sideways, and here's where a security team, it's important for them, because again, it's not necessarily the trauma that we're dealing with. In fact, I would say that's not my concern at all. My concern is for the general medical problems that a person is dealing with on a daily basis. And again, some of those CEOs and other folks have significant medical problems that a team needs to be aware of. I think the relationship that the solo practitioner that we're talking about here would have with that medical oversight, it doesn't entail, number one, a significant financial burden to that person. It should not. People routinely will say, well, you're a trauma surgeon and you're an intensivist. You're probably, you're the top 0.001% of the medical world. And I would agree, yes, that's true. But again, that's not what you're hiring me for. More importantly, that's not what I'm offering. Honestly, I should not have to be engaging you as a trauma surgeon, because if I'm engaging you, my patient now, as a trauma surgeon, well, you've been shot, stabbed, fallen off height, gotten into a major crash. At that point, that's a significant problem that should have, I would like to say, there's no such things as accidents. We say that in the trauma community. These incidents really, with enough planning and logistics understanding, should prevent. So the ability to interface with that solo practitioner and to come up with a proper advance, the medical intelligence analysis that I would then give to them, beyond the, sure, I got your certifications, sure, I can render, wellness to your program, whatever. But really, it's a service that my company is providing. And ultimately, my client, my principal client, is the security team, is that solo practitioner, if you will.
But the thing is, you're engaged. You sound excited about the work. I mean, you do,
Very
right?
much so. I do. It's actually a pleasure. And it may sound anathema to some people. It's like, well, you're a trauma surgeon and what have you. I get that all the time. In fact, 2 years ago at the Special Operations Medical Association Scientific Assembly, I had a former Navy SEAL and a former Marine Corps Force Recon, two gentlemen who towered over me, looked like, brick walls, wonderfully pleasant, who said that when they heard they were meeting me, they started to bristle. I said, well, gentlemen, you're about 2 meters in height. God knows how many stone you weigh. And again, this is for your UK audience. For the United States folks, these gentlemen were over 6 feet tall, and quite large. I'm coming out of my ivory tower, and I told him, I said, I think the medical community, and again, I can't speak for everybody. This is simply my opinion, so let me put in that caveat right there. I think we've done a disservice. When I went to do training as a physician, my understanding was that I was going to get out, and maybe it was being overly altruistic and naive, but my understanding was that at the end of it, I was going to get out, maybe go into the military, or or help with law enforcement or something of the sort. And when that became something, after decades of schooling, training, and at my age now, in some fashion, I'm giving back. For me to now say, well, I'm above this or at a level that, I shouldn't even be bothered by something like that, I think is unfortunate, because we're not giving back. I'm not able to use my education and my experiences for the betterment of folks in general. Again, I don't mean to sound overly presumptuous here, but the fact that my desires have always been to assist, especially in an environment where things can be very critical and can get very critical very quickly. It's my forte. I don't, at this point, very few things shock and surprise me, but most people don't understand that trauma surgeons in general, and I'm not trying to put a plug in here for our community, but we deal with the general medical issues of a patient, um, again, both from whatever issue they have before coming into the hospital to, thereafter. I've been engaged in a lot of preventative health maintenance. I've gone to schools um, to assist with that, up to and including convalescence when the patients and their families, have these protracted concerns and cares. It's almost like the specialist surgeons in Japan. I'm not sure if your listeners understand that, and this was what it was explained to me. I have an absolute love and desire, for Japanese culture, desire to learn the language more. I've been doing that since I was a teenager. And through some martial arts training that I did, I was with a neurosurgeon, a Japanese neurosurgeon, and he explained to me that whenever a specialist in Japan engages with a patient, that person then becomes the GP for them. I don't know if this has changed. This was explained to me, geez, when I was in medical school, about 2 decades ago. But I found it very fascinating because that resonated with me, such that here's a person who is a brain surgeon, but now has assumed care of somebody, and by the societal norms is required to some degree to handle the patient's diabetes. So, as an intensivist and a trauma surgeon, I can handle any patient anywhere. at the beginning of their hospital care to the end of their hospital care, and I do that routinely too, which is palliative care. So my experience and breadth thereof, the spectrum of my capabilities, why shouldn't they be brought to bear in a community that deals with all levels of safety and security? You're talking about children, the families, whether we're talking about adults or not. This is something that really is disconcerting, even to medical practitioners. The minute you say pediatric medical problem, even if it was to say trauma, they start, getting a significant degree of sphincter tone.
Yeah. A little bit like saying anything wedding related when you book a venue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But no, that's an interesting reflection with, specialist to generalist to specialist and everything in between. And hey, we had Kenji Okamoto, who's our friend in Japan, who he is a facilitator because EP is not quite condoned in Japan in the same way. We should have him back on and sort of try it out. And I asked the question, hey, you do sound excited about it, because in my mind, I wondered, how will we get high flying consultants to not do that? And hey, it could be a welcome break from trauma surgery. I don't know.
But... it is a welcome break. Again, I think it's important also to understand the level of educational components that people are looking for, because again, a number of these companies, these purveyors of medical education, it's very cool, and we say tactical, to say, well, tourniquets, and this and that, and bleeding and shooting, and well, this is a tactical backpack or something of the sort. As we mentioned earlier, that's not what I see a lot of. I'm obviously in the community. I obviously, deal with and work with, special operations groups, whether it be law enforcement or military. But again, I think it's important to understand that when we're talking about, let's say, the tactical medic or the paramedic, we have to delineate certification, licensure, and competencies. Because again, just because you say you're a tactical medic, okay, well, wonderful. What does that mean? I mean, anybody literally can be in a tactical situation. You can probably be in a tactical situation in the supermarket. But honestly, are we expecting, let's say, general military personnel, simply because they're military, to identify themselves as tactical? I'm not sure about that. I can't answer that or speak to that. But I think it's important to say that a paramedic qualification, these folks undergo a significant amount of education that entails a number of certifications. That does not necessarily mean or equate to licensure. And any medical director, because again, they have to work under the aegis, under the license of another medical provider, a physician, at least in the United States. Again, that gets back to the oversight that's being provided. So I think it's important to understand what type of background this person has, what certifications they have accumulated or acquired, and what licensing agency, more often than not, it's the state, at least in the United States, that's giving them licensure to practice medicine. And that becomes really important because, at least in the United States, here's something wonderful that I've run into. Another reason why I've acquired licensure in a number of different states is that if somebody, let's say law enforcement, a specialty team like a SWAT team member, a medic on a SWAT team, has a significant amount of medical gear that they manage to cross state lines with, if there's no mutual assistance agreements or some sort of understanding, the reciprocity there, I've been told point blank by the Attorney General of one said state that if your people come into my state, quote unquote, with their medical bags, et cetera, and render care that goes not according to plan, they used a different expression, then I will hold them liable for practicing without a license. That even gets back to the intent to practice without a license. So, at least in the United States, it's really important for physicians who provide that type of oversight and direction to understand that, again, you can assist, you can provide protocols, policies, etc., to a security agency. But if you're going to somehow say you're now operating under my license, I think they need to be quite cognizant of those ramifications. And that goes doubly for the agency or company that hires that person or advertises to a client, yes, our folks, our security, specialists are credentialed and they're able to practice medicine to some degree. Rendering care, first aid, CPR, well, sure, understandable. But again, having a bag of medical equipment, including, and in some states, you need that license for Narcan or the reversal agent, narcotics reversal agents, even insulin.
So just to clarify, you can, because you're licensed and because you're a doctor, they can't because they're neither licensed nor a doctor.
If they are under my license and they have that additional certification, let's say like a paramedic, again, it's specific to the laws of the state. And I know this is a bugaboo word, at least in the United States and in Western Christian countries, is the Good Samaritan law. I'm loath to even address that because I hear that.
Isn't that a French thing? Isn't that very, very, very prevalent in France? If you don't do anything, then you're also liable.
Okay, so this again will now enter into a number of different laws that are in place, and these vary. These vary by, at least in the United States, by state. And at least abroad, again, it's going to vary widely based on the circumstances that one finds themselves in. There are laws that will require a physician to act, and then there are places where that is not incumbent upon them, and there are places where it would, I would dare say, be in the benefit of a practitioner not to render care, because again, it's very, very specific. The physician oversight, the medical oversight, they need to be really aware and engaged with the laws of wherever their team happens to operate. If they do not, and again, there are places I've heard of specialists, protection specialists, because they were brought up, whether that be in France, the UK, or the United States. One in particular, they were on an aircraft, a foreign national aircraft, and I say that because I'm an American, but a patient started having chest issues. Well, this person, through their training or what have you, started rendering care and providing CPR. Well, the patient died. Well, as soon as that plane landed, that specialist was arrested. And that's the thing that people need to be mindful of. If you're under a foreign flag and you decide to start rendering care, are you cognizant of what their laws are? That again are oftentimes, in many places, we're talking about religious, laws that come into play. Unfortunately, what was believed to be the situation in this case was, well, it was the will of God that they would have this problem and they were going to die, and here you are getting involved. Well, how is it that you deemed it important for you to get involved? Number one, to change what was going to happen, and two, how do we know that you didn't cause this patient to die through your negligence? So again, any team, and I've gotten numerous calls to assist with that, and that is, teams are going abroad. What are the laws, what is the licensure, what can they do, what can't they do, and that takes a fair degree of planning. It's not as simple as, oh, well, there's policies in place, guys and gals don't do X, Y, and Z. Just be mindful and be aware of what's going on around you and don't get into any trouble. That that no longer flies. You can't do that.
And so I guess, where does this all sort of lead? This leads to maybe an appetite to use an MD in your team. It's an awareness that some people are. You might rock up on your latest detail because many people literally get a call. Who's got the multi-entry visa to Chad? And they're like me, and suddenly they're on a detail the next afternoon, right? So, a lot of people will just be suddenly exposed to this. However, to the extent that you can, let's say I am a company that provides EP services. Obviously we don't want to talk numbers, but how should they start to price bundling an MD? How should they start to sell it, package it? Should it be, I don't do it, go talk to Dr. George? What's the logistics there?
It's important to identify three major facets of what you're looking for the medical service provider to offer. And that is, one, do you need medical direction? And that comes in a couple different flavors. The medical direction would be somebody that would handle certifications, potentially licensure requirements, providing, let's say, for budgeting, performance improvement, quality improvement, things that most training programs for medical directors would entail. It's helpful to know that if that's what they're looking for, then fair enough. That doesn't entail having the medical, the physician embedded in the team. That's not what that needs. So that's easy enough to consult the physician. So they can, at that point, they would be contracted if they wanted just simply to provide those items, and that's all they do. And that's fine. They can certainly do that. They can also have them, let's say, on retainer, or they can even pay them such that if they wanted to continue providing for these services, to do that monthly or yearly or what have you. Again, I think it's important to understand what they want. If they want medical control, again, we make a distinction here because medical direction is exactly that. It's that level of oversight that provides for these fundamental things. If you're talking about medical control, at least in the United States, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, basically, they identify that as care, direct care that is rendered when somebody is actually en route to a healthcare institution. So in the situation here, if there's a team, a detail, or whatever that needs that ability to call up, hey, doc, I've got this situation, et cetera, what should I do? Or I'm about to do this, or I have done that, or whatever. That I think is the next flavor. So are we talking about being the director, or are you simply, the directorship? And again, that comes in a number of different flavors. Medical directors can also be hired to provide education. My education, given my level, especially with all of the other medical educators out there, what I come in at is the train the trainer. I'm looking for those medics, those clinicians, let's say nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, or what have you, to train them for, let's say, recredentialing, to understand more of what it would entail for continuing education and what have you. The medical director's course that our company does is specific to protection and security communities. Because again, if you're looking at medical direction for, let's say, EMS, Well, that's wonderful. Unfortunately, physicians, emergency medicine physicians, God bless them, and we're lucky to have them. Again, their medical direction, by and large, is for ambulance crews. Well, protective security agencies and companies were not ambulance. We are not running ambulance services. Uh, Again, as we understand it here now, does transportation and what have you entail, let's say, evacuation, et cetera, and potentially medical, control? Absolutely. But again, for, like you said, the solo practitioner or something like that, I think it's important that they don't get overwhelmed such that they're calling any number of medical service companies only to feel weighed down and overwhelmed by the different things that they simply don't need and the cost associated with them. So again, understanding, do they need directorship, direction, by somebody directly embedded with the team, i.e. the control, and or do they need something where they can have somebody interface with the client, which is another facet here. Again, I hear about it all the time, that the principal is not giving them the information or they don't think it's important. Well, the problem is that there's only so much that, again, a protective security specialist is able to gather where a physician can actually bridge that gap and can go places with the client that otherwise would not be afforded without their input. So, I think that's important to know. Do you, have a team, or are we talking about covered or uncovered protection here? So again, it's important to understand what exactly you're looking for. I would be very, very reticent to recommend to any agency that they offer services of a medical nature without consulting somebody who, as a physician like myself, or even legal and insurance adjusters. I've had wonderful conversations with insurance providers for the protective security community. And it's phenomenal to me that a medical writer is more often than not even offered because simply the company, the security company, is not asking for it. I find that to be distressing, disconcerting at the very least. So understanding what you need to do for licensure, I mean, people have to be licensed to provide security. Well, do understand that if you're going to say something like we have medical capability, that now starts to border on, okay, are you practicing medicine? Are you saying that, you have people that can practice some degree of medicine? Because again, if you're prepared for certain situations, you have a bag, et cetera. I have it on, like I said, I've had interactions with legal counsel and other attorneys and barristers who have told me directly, they should be cognizant that you need a license to practice medicine. And if there's an intent to practice, that too can be problematic for somebody if the situation becomes difficult and problematic.
Well, I think then that's a good point to leave it on because, for all the efforts of an operator, an EP specialist, you need a license. So,
Right.
so I think we can think about engaging MDs. It's not just a luxury in sort of fanciful circumstances, as maybe we imagined during the pandemic. Some people said, "Oh no, let's have a bunch of equipment on our team." I think there's a much more real world application to it, and I think
Correct.
nowhere is completely a safe zone. Nowhere is a completely
Right.
a boring zone anymore, if it ever was. And I think that is very important for our EP community around the world.
Wonderful.
we have explored a lot of topics, and we've gone around a lot of different ways. But yes, it's a great pleasure to have you on. What is next for you? Where will people next find you? How can people get in touch?
For me, I'm becoming more and more enchanted, and I should say the networking with the different groups has been wonderful. I think offering myself such that people know that there are folks who actually care and are willing to provide a higher level of insight and or oversight, that we're here. Please let us know, because we're around, and folks should not feel like, well, it's been the way we've done it for ages, and that's what's good enough is fine by us. So if that's an answer, you'll find me around and engaged. Please look me up.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. George, thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure having you on. It was wonderful to see you at the Vegas conference, and I really enjoy this topic, MD in your EP team. So this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast. Well, thank you very much, Dr. George DeBusk. Wonderful to have seen you in Vegas last month, but also lovely to start the new year off with a new year, new you kind of question. Medical doctor in the team. Sean, I know it was quite a long interview, but what did you take away from today's session?
There was a lot of in-depth answers there, but very interesting all the same. And, if you're a billionaire, high net worth individual, or you can have a doctor on call, right? You're not going to be going to a doctor surgery, queuing up, calling the NHS to make an appointment, like say me or you. You're going to have access to these doctors, but I guess the question was, do we have one embedded within the EP team? And I think, if you've got a principal that's got an ongoing health complaint, there's no reason why they shouldn't be traveling with a doctor. Certainly with the aging principals I've worked with who've had their parents who are getting on, they've had that way. They've had nurses and doctors who've travelled with them because they've needed ongoing 24-hour healthcare. But for a regular high net worth individual, a doctor embedded on a CP team, like I said in the intro, I'm not so sure it's something that can be sold to everybody, but certainly as a service, where the CP team has access to the doctor, and the doctor can write out some protocols if something goes wrong, and the doctor can keep the team up to date with any, ongoing health changes that they may need to be aware of their principal. I think for sure, it's a huge asset to have access to a doctor. Certainly, when we've just gone through pandemics such as COVID, you've got a doctor on the books who's, getting immediate access to the latest government advice, and they're a health professional, and they can feed back from their point of view. And, they've done all the studies for years. They've got the correct ticks in the box, where me or you Googling this information, it's not going to be as, we're not going to have the same studies and same experience as what, a doctor will bring to the table, for sure.
That's right. And it elevates the conversation. It gets mano a mano, or I don't know if that's PC anymore, but politically correct person with another person on the same level. They're speaking the right language.
Yeah. And when you're trying to tell your principal you can't do this or you can't do that during the pandemic, there's a lot of times they will listen to a doctor if it's health advice, but they're not going to listen to you.
Someone with a spinal injury, they say, I'm going to go caving. You're like, no, you're not. Well, try it. It is just much more effective if you get the right person. But interestingly, I don't know if I'm going to feature medical technology so much this year at the CP Tech Forum on the 26th of January. See what I did there. But I am very much looking forward to it. I know a lot of BBA, NABA, and Circuit Magazine subscribers, members have signed up already. We would very much like to see you there on the 26th of January at the Grand Connaught Rooms. please do look out. Of course, Circuit Magazine and BBA and NABA has been putting out lots of information and codes and special registrations. So, please look out for that. Now, I say that not as some sort of crazy marketing ploy, but we do actually cut off registrations because we do actually sell out, which is, good news. It's just we'd rather you as our community be there, because you've been supporting us a lot. It was fantastic to see so many of our listeners in Vegas. You know who you are, but you said, two of you at least said to me, "Hey, I recognize that voice," which is enormously flattering. And you said some great things about the magazine and the podcast. Some of you had some good ideas for new content, new styles. Thank you. We are taking those on board. It was wonderful. You actually came up to me and said, "Do you know what? This I would like to see, and this perhaps I would like to change." I think excellent that you did all of that. I think this is really good news. Please keep everything going with the BBA Connect app, NABA Protector app, and of course the magazine itself. We've started the new year. We're looking forward to seeing you very soon. And what a great topic to start the year with medical practitioners and a new year, new you kind of look. So from Sean and myself, this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.